In this session we going to learn about income under the head of salaries. Section 15 to Section 17. Before that, if you're watching my video without subscribing to my channel, do subscribe and like the video. It motivates us to upload more. This channel runs on without monetization. We don't earn any income. My only purpose, I opened this channel to share knowledge among students to score good marks. All I need is your support, so subscribe and like my video. Specified employees. Director employee. An employee of a company who is also a director is a specified employee. It is immaterial whether he is a full-time director or part-time director. It also does not matter whether he is a nominee of the management, workers, financial institutions, or the government. It is also not material whether or not he is a director throughout the previous year. An employee who has substantial interest in the company. An employee of a company who has substantial interest in that company is a specified employee. A person has a substantial interest in a company if he is a beneficial owner of equity shares carrying 20% or more of the voting power in the company. Beneficial and legal ownership. In order to determine whether a person has a substantial interest in a company, it is the beneficial ownership of equity shares carrying 20% or more of the voting power that is relevant rather than the legal ownership. Let's see an example. A. Carta of a Huff is a registered shareholder of Bright Ltd. The amount for purchasing the shares is financed by the Huff. The dividend is also received by the Huff. Supposing further that A is an employee in Bright Limited, the question arises whether he is a specified employee. In this case, he cannot be called a specified person since he has no beneficial interest in the shares registered in his name. It is only for the purpose of satisfying the statutory requirements that the shares are registered in the name of A. All the benefits arising from the shareholding goes to the Huff. Conversely, it may be noted that an employee who is not a registered shareholder will be considered as a specified employee if he has beneficial interest in 20% or more of the equity shares in the company. Employee drawing in excess of Rs. 0.50,000. An employee other than an employee described in above, whose income chargeable under the head salaries exceeds Rs. 0.50,000 is a specified employee. The above salary is to be considered exclusive of the value of all benefits or amenities not provided by way of monetary payments. In other words, for computing the limit of Rs. 50,000, the following items have to be excluded or deducted. All non-monetary benefits. Monetary benefits which are exempt under Section 10. This is because the exemptions provided under Section 10 are excluded completely from salaries. Standard deduction up to Rs. 50,000 is to be excluded irrespective of the regime. Deduction for entertainment allowance and deduction toward professional tax are also to be excluded if the assessee exercises the option of shifting out of the default tax regime provided under Section 115 BAC-1A. If an employee is employed with more than one employer, the aggregate of the salary received from all employers is to be taken into account in determining the above ceiling limit of Rs. 0.50,000, that is salary for this purpose is equal to basic salary plus dearness allowance plus commission, whether payable monthly or turnover based plus bonus plus fees plus any other taxable payment plus any taxable allowances plus any other monetary benefits, deductions under Section 16. Valuation of perquisites. The income tax rules contain the provisions for valuation of perquisites. It is important to note that only those perquisites which the employee actually enjoys have to be valued and taxed in his hand. For example, suppose a company offers a housing accommodation rent-free to an employee but the latter declines to accept it, then the value of such accommodation obviously cannot be evaluated and taxed in the hands of the employees. For the purpose of computing the income chargeable under the head salaries, the value of perquisites provided by the employer directly or indirectly to the employee or to any member of his household by reason of his employment shall be determined in accordance with Rule 3. Value of rent-free accommodation. Value of accommodation provided to employee at a concessional rate. Sub-Rule 1 of Rule 3. Accommodation would be deemed to have been provided at a concessional rate if the value of accommodation computed in the prescribed manner exceeds the rent recoverable from, or payable by, the assessee. The value of residential accommodation provided by the employer during the previous year shall be determined in the following manner. First circumstance. Where the accommodation is provided by the central government or any state government to the employees, either holding office or post in connection with the affairs of the union or of such state. In case of unfurnished accommodation, license fee determined by the central government or any state government in respect of accommodation in accordance with the rules framed by such government, as reduced by the rent actually paid by the employee. In case of furnished accommodation, the value of perquisite as determined under. In case of furnished accommodation, should be increased by, if furniture is owned by employer, 10% per annum of the cost of furniture, including television sets, radio sets, refrigerators, other household appliances, air conditioning, plant or equipment. If such furniture is hired from a third party, the actual hire charges payable for the same as reduced by any charges paid or payable for the same by the employee during the previous year. Second circumstance. Where the accommodation is provided by any other employer, where the accommodation is owned by the employer. In case of unfurnished accommodation, 15% of salary in cities having population more than 25 lakhs as per 2001 census, 10% of salary in cities having population greater than 10 lakhs less than 25 lakhs as per 2001 census, 7.5% of salary in other areas, in respect of the period during which the said accommodation was occupied by the employee during the previous year, as reduced by the rent, if any, actually paid by the employee. In case of furnished accommodation, the value of perquisite as determined should be increased by, if furniture is owned by employer, 10% per annum of the cost of furniture, including television sets, refrigerators, other household appliances, air conditioning plant or equipment or other similar appliances or gadgets. If such furniture is hired from a third party, the actual hire charges payable for the same as reduced by any charges paid or payable for the same by the employee during the previous year. Next one. Where the accommodation is taken on lease or rent by the employer. In case of unfurnished accommodation, actual amount of lease rental paid or payable by the employer, or 15% of salary whichever is lower, as reduced by the rent, if any, actually paid by the employee. In case of furnished accommodation, the value of perquisite as determined should be increased by, if furniture is owned by employer, 10% per annum of the cost of furniture, including television sets, radio sets, refrigerators, other household appliances, air conditioning plant or equipment or other similar appliances or gadgets. If such furniture is hired from a third party, the actual hire charges payable for the same as reduced by any charges paid or payable for the same by the employee during the previous year. Lastly, where the accommodation is provided by any employer, whether government or any other employer, in a hotel. In case of unfurnished accommodation, not applicable. In case of furnished accommodation, 24% of salary paid or payable for the previous year or the actual charges paid or payable to such hotel, whichever is lower, for the period during which such accommodation is provided, as reduced by the rent, if any, actually paid or payable by the employee. However, where the employee is provided such accommodation for a period not exceeding in aggregate 15 days on his transfer from one place to another, there would be no perquisite. Some extra points needed to known that if an employee is provided with accommodation on account of his transfer from one place to another at the new place of posting while retaining the accommodation at the other place, the value of perquisite shall be determined with reference to only one such accommodation which has the lower perquisite value, as calculated above, for a period not exceeding 90 days and thereafter, the value of perquisite shall be charged for both such accommodations. Where the accommodation is provided by the central government or any state government to an employee who is serving on deputation with any body or undertaking under the control of such government, the employer of such an employee shall be deemed to be that body or undertaking where the employee is serving on deputation, and the value of perquisite of such an accommodation shall be the amount calculated in accordance with the above table, as if the accommodation is owned by the employer. Accommodation includes a house, flat, farmhouse or part thereof, or accommodation in a hotel, motel, service apartment, guest house, caravan, mobile home, ship, or other floating structure. Hotel includes licensed accommodation in the nature of motel, service apartment, or guest house. Salary for the purpose of valuation of accommodation. Salary includes pay, allowances, bonus or commission payable monthly or otherwise or any monetary payment, by whatever name called, from one or more employers, as the case may be. However, it does not include the following, namely: 1. Dearness allowance or dearness pay unless it enters into the computation of superannuation or retirement benefits of the employee concerned. 2. Employer's contribution to the Provident Fund account of the employee. 3. Allowances which are exempted from the payment of tax. 4. Value of the perquisites specified in Section 17, 2. 5. Any payment or expenditure specifically excluded under proviso to Section 17, 2. Salary are to be considered on due basis for the relevant period for which accommodation is provided. If the employee receives salary from more than one employer, the aggregate of the salary received from both the employers has to be taken into account for valuation of rent-free accommodation. 6. Lump sum payments received at the time of termination of service or superannuation or voluntary retirement, like gratuity, severance pay, leave encashment, voluntary retrenchment benefits, commutation of pension and similar payments.